Cahalt group leader Talion looked around hopelessly. It had only been 3 rotations since the Syrinx had attacked the colony. She was angry at herself for getting her command, and the civilians they protected trapped with the cliffs at her back. She'd waited too long to evacuate this settlement, and now they were boxed in. Talion didn't even know how many were on the moon. The Brooks had only started this colony up 5 cycles ago. There was only 1 settlement with plans for more. All told, there were about 4,000 Brooks here, and those were mostly farmers and miners. Talion's company had been surveying suitable places for a Federation military base. She led a team of 20 engineers, geologists, and other scientists to find the best spot for their use, and that minimized negative impact on the moon. They didn't want to repeat the mistake made on Variate 3, where an idiot military commander built the base over a major fault line. A planetary quake ripped the base in half and leveled it completely. Luckily, the only serious casualty was the officer's career. She had 130 soldiers with her as security, mostly to protect against local fauna and assist with any heavy work. Cahalt group leader Talion was caught completely by surprise by the Syrinx slaver party attack. Her transport ship was destroyed in the first volley of the small Syrinx fleet. The system of satellites wasn't in place to boost the communication signal out of the system. She still tried, though, but they could still receive, and from the panicked broadcasts, it sounded like the Syrinx were attacking all over the 4 local systems. Local militias weren't enough to stop them, so they had everything their way. But they got one hell of a surprise when they attacked this settlement. They never expected to find 130 Federation troopers. They left almost 100 dead in their initial attack, but that just seemed to piss them off. The Syrinx didn't expect any resistance, so they came in lightly armed, expecting to meet local militias at most. And that's why her command was still alive. She'd taken maybe 20 casualties, dead or wounded. At least, civilian casualties were fairly low. After the first attack, she set them to digging underground bunkers to take cover in, and used the removed dirt to reinforce the wall. It was only meant to keep their livestock in and wild predators out. There were high cliffs to her left and behind her, with mine tunnels leading into the rock. The ground in front of her was fairly flat and had no obstructions. The right side was a slope that cut through the cliffs around her. The locals said they got their wood from an isolated forest up there. They told her it was surrounded by drops on 3 sides, so no escape that way. But after 3 rotations, they had almost no food and were low on energy packs for their laser rifles. But there was sufficient water in the cistern, and she had no comms or medical supplies. But it didn't matter anyway. She'd seen more and more Syrinx ships landing near the enemy camp. The Syrinx managed to get some snipers on top of the cliff to her left and were beginning to form up just out of range. But that's not what made her blood run cold. "Jacadra!" rang out from dozens of throats. They were merciless killers. They were bipedal insectoids that were as tall as a single-story building, 4 arms that ended in wickedly curved talons, long fangs, and skin tougher than Federation combat armor. They also had a nasty habit of consuming their prey, and there were at least 500 of them exiting the gorge. The Syrinx were done playing if they were releasing the Jacadra. They wouldn't leave anyone alive to enslave. Talion was so engrossed by the Jacadra that she hadn't even noticed the sniper fire on the left had stopped. The Jacadra began to advance at their lumbering run. Talion looked at her surviving troopers. "It's been an honor leading you." She paused before finishing, "Let's take as many of these bastards to the afterlife as we can." Her command fired on the Jacadra, but with little effect. They'd only killed 1, and the Jacadra were more than halfway to them. Firing from her troopers was dying off as they exhausted the last of their energy packs. It was about then that she heard what sounded like a horn, but not like any she knew, like a kind of bellowing sound. But that is not what made her blood run cold. The sound of some kind of drums, followed by this eerie sound that she couldn't even describe. And then she saw them. Some sort of biped she'd never seen. Maybe 10 of them. And what she realized were some kind of instruments. A pair of them had some kind of tall horn with a creature's head at the opening. Her people had something similar to the drums being carried by the other group, but what really drew her eyes were the 4 beings playing some sort of sack with sticks coming out of it. That was the source of the unholy sound which had gained everyone's attention. Even the Jacadra stopped and looked. They also acted like it caused them pain. One of her troopers blurted out, "It's the humans!" Talion had never met a human, but she'd heard of them. They'd only recently joined the Federation, but were not as advanced as most races. It was said they favored projectile weapons, but if lasers couldn't penetrate a Jacadra's hide, then what would solid pieces of metal do? She had to admit they were brave, standing on the edge of the cliff like that. But what did they expect this noise to accomplish, no matter how haunting the sound was? She found out less than a minute later. With all the attention focused on the humans on the cliff, no one noticed the humans streaming down the hillside until their battle cry rang out. There were hundreds of them, and they rode on some type of quadruped animal. No, not an animal, but a machine of some type. They were covered in body armor, but the scariest were their heads. The demonic visages that peered out from under the helmets were like something out of a nightmare. Each of them carried some kind of spear, with a glowing tip that was being held upright, and what looked like some kind of rifle in a scabbard in front of their legs. She couldn't believe they were attacking with such primitive weapons. One of them even carried a banner that flapped in the wind. It was a brave show, but foolish. The Jacadra turned towards and started to run at them. The gap quickly closed between the two, and then the huge horns sounded again. Another huge cry came from hundreds of throats. The spears came down in unison. Right before they reached the Jacadra, that haunting sound came from the hillside as they started playing again. She saw the Jacadra visibly flinch and stumble, not enough to make them fall, but just enough to leave an opening for the charging humans. Now she understood the music. It was a distraction, and it seemed to mess with the Jacadra somehow. The noise, as the humans crashed into the stalled Jacadra, was immense. Screams, cries, and howling echoed off the cliffs. She was stunned by what she was seeing. The Jacadras were dying to those spears, driven deep into their bodies. Even the ones that weren't impaled on the spear were knocked over by the metal beasts ridden by the humans. After a human had stuck his spear in their target, they pulled out some sort of short rifle and were firing into the Jacadra at near point-blank range. She was stunned when she saw a Jacadra's head explode when hit by one. Even the things they rode were attacking with their own claws and teeth. But it wasn't all the humans' way. The Jacadra were starting to fight back. She saw a human plucked from the thing it rode and ripped in half by one. It was some of the most vicious fighting that she'd ever seen, and it lasted less than a few heartbeats before the humans began to break and retreat from either side of the melee. She heard another roar. A second group of humans were charging into the mass of Jacadra. The Jacadra were unprepared for this attack and faced all different directions. They were impaled in the back and on the sides, some directly in the face. She took a quick look at the first group and saw them lined up with more of those spears. Now she understood they would keep doing this until they killed all the Jacadra, or died. That's when movement at the top of the slope caught her eye. There were more humans up there, but they were lying flat and shooting into the mass of Syrinx to the rear. Another group of humans were on the other side and firing into them as well. The Syrinx were caught in a crossfire with nowhere to hide. They must have been just as focused on the melee in the middle of the field as she was. The Jacadra had enough and started to run away, something Talion had never even heard of them doing in battle. The humans were not content to let them go, but kept after them, killing them by the scores. The Skiriks broke when they saw what was happening with the Jacadra. They started to run for their ships, but ran into a line of humans blocking the way. These humans not only had their rifles, but also some bigger guns that mowed down Syrinx and Jacadra alike. There was nowhere safe for them, and in a matter of moments, none of the enemy was left standing. A pair of these intimidating riders came over to her little fort with empty hands. They removed their helmets, and it was then she saw the demonic faces were just masks. One of them raised their hand to their forehead for a moment, and then spoke, "Captain O'Doul, 7th Terran Cavalry at your service." He indicated the other human, Lieutenant Valdez, my second in command. Talion was at a loss for words. I've never seen Jacadras run away before or killed so quickly. She finally managed to get out. Both humans chuckled. Not surprised, it's a tactic we created or recreated for them. "You've fought them before?" Talion blurted out. The captain answered, "Yes, they started attacking our colonies with them about 5 of our years ago." "Do you always fight like this?" The one called Lieutenant Valdez answered, "Oh, hell no. We'd be wiped out in a hurry." Talion had so many questions. "What was that noise from on top of the cliff?" O'Doul gave a big grin before replying, "Just a little something that my ancestors used to terrify an enemy before battle." He continued, "The tall horns are called a carnix, drums, and bagpipes. Those are the ones that would terrify my ancestors' enemies on Earth." Talion laughed a little. "It terrified me. What were they playing?" O'Doul replied, "A song written centuries ago during one of our deadliest conflicts before we went into space. It's called The Bloody Fields of Flanders." Talion mulled that over. "And you played that to distract the Jacadra?" Lieutenant Valdez replied, "Something about the bagpipes messes with them. Throws them off stride." O'Doul added, "We don't just use them against Jacadra, they distract most aliens as well. We call it shock and awe."